The German National Theater movement began when Johann Friedrich Löwen, Gotthold Ephraim Lessing, and others established the Hamburg Enterprise in 1767. Although this project was abandoned after only 2 years, it nevertheless succeeded in ushering in an era during which German-language theaters were established with increasing frequency. These institutions provided Central European sovereigns and independent theater companies with a significantly cheaper alternative to especially Italian opera, and one that simultaneously articulated their patriotism as champions of the German arts. National theaters commonly feature within discussions of the emergence of a German national consciousness and the development of German language opera during the Enlightenment and beyond, for these institutions provide a convenient framework in which to examine both. Yet the impetus behind the foundation of such a theater, the insistence on labeling one as national, and even what nation they were established to represent, has been interpreted in a variety of ways. Michael Sosulski has recently argued that, quote, the word nation stood for a community of common language, customs, culture, and temperament, but also for an ethical community of shared values and conduct. For him, the former group was in place before the National Theater movement began, while the latter constituted the missing aspects of nation that such theaters were designed to establish and fulfill. Employing Gottschedian theatrical didacticism as a point of departure, Martin Nedball complements Sosulski's study through his examination of how German national identity was articulated in music theater. By investigating Mozart's Singspiele, Nedball demonstrates that national identity in German language opera was linked to morality. Thus, he explores the very aspect of nation that Sosulski argues national theaters were designed to project. Although these studies do not directly address the difference between a national theater specifically and a German language theater more generally, as Germanist Reinhard Meyer ultimately concluded, the principal difference between a German language theater and a national theater is that the latter was named as such to represent a prince's territorial rule. Therefore, any German court, touring, or civic theater that presented music in the vernacular could be considered engaged in the national theater movement regardless of its proper name. The Holy Roman Empire bridged the gap between the national aspects of national theater as a concept performed on stage and as an articulation of princely territorialism. To borrow the words of historian Joachim Whaley, quote, the Holy Roman Empire was not a nation state and could never have become one. It was, however, a state, that is, a coherent political order, and also clearly identified from the Middle Ages onwards with something that understood itself as the German nation. Although in the first instance this nation denoted the princes who constituted the empire, perceptions began to change in 1765. That year, the statesman Friedrich Karl von Moser sparked a public debate on German national identity, one that scrutinized concepts like nationhood, patriotism, and national ways of thinking and feeling, when he proclaimed, "We are one nation," in his Von dem Deutschen Nationalgeist. While concepts of the imperial nation increasingly embraced culture and language, educated Germans nevertheless continued to associate empire with the nation. In the final essay of his Hamburgische Dramaturgie, Lessing concluded, quote, regarding the well-intentioned idea to create a national theater for the Germans when we Germans are not yet a nation, I do not speak of our political constitution, but only of our social character, end quote. Inventing his frustration with the failure of the Hamburg enterprise, Lessing insisted that despite possessing a political nation, the Germans still lacked a culture free from foreign influence. Thus, it is little surprise that political debates regarding the nation as deliberated by statesmen such as Moser unfolded at the very moment intellectuals contemplated the viability of national theaters. One particularly noteworthy point of intersection between studies examining German national theater specifically and German language opera in the years around 1800 more generally is the locations they examine. The theaters in Berlin, Hamburg, Mannheim, Munich, and Vienna are so commonly discussed in this context that one would easily be forgiven for believing that they were the only national theaters. The importance of these investigations notwithstanding, their almost exclusive reliance on these 5 cities to tell the story of the so-called German-speaking lands, or more accurately, the Holy Roman Empire, is somewhat curious given that there were additional national theaters in Altona, Augsburg, Bonn, Braunschweig, Brno, Frankfurt am Main, Graz, Innsbruck, Mainz, Nuremberg, and Prague. This is to say nothing of the hundreds of other German-language theaters engaged in the movement. Undoubtedly, the traditional sites inform a significant and very compelling aspect of the musical network that spread across the empire. However, they represent only a handful of pins on a much larger cultural political map. By tracing the Duchy of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg's contributions to the developing National Theater project, my paper today will demonstrate that this little explored center was at the heart of a theater network, one which extended physically throughout Central Europe and was linked conceptually in a common space. When a fire destroyed the Weimar Palace on the 6th of May, 1774, the acting company of Abel Seyler moved to nearby Gotha. Duke Ernst II Ludwig of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg allowed the troupe to perform to Gotha's paying public in his otherwise unused court theater. At first, the company was not a subsidized Hoftheater, but rather an independent troupe that was free to travel to other centers such as Leipzig. But in the autumn of 1775, the Duke extended contracts to about 20 members of Seyler's company, thus establishing the empire's first permanent German-language court theater. This new Hoftheater's first performance took place on the 2nd of October, 1775, with the musical prologue Das Fest der Talia by dramatist Heinrich August Oettcher-Reichard and music director Anton Schweitzer. This was the first of some 211 performances of music theater during the company's period of operation between 1775 and 1779. Yet, although the Duke now subsidized the theater, he neither decided nor significantly shaped its musical repertory. This duty was reserved explicitly for Reichard. The musical repertory he constructed consisted of works by Bende, Gratry, Helmich, Hiller, Hönicke, Monsigny, Neefe, Philidor, Piccini, Reichard, Schweitzer, Stegmann, and Wolf. Reichard was also responsible for completing translations of foreign language works if he was otherwise unable to obtain a suitable adaptation. And while the company staged French works in translation like any other company in the empire, its repertory comprised mostly original German language works. Although with 8 pieces, Bende was the best represented composer, Gratry claims the highest number of performances with 54, followed closely by Bende and Hiller with 41 each. Bende's melodramas, Ariadne auf Naxos and Medea, were among the Hoftheater's most noteworthy pieces. Premiered just months before the foundation of the Hoftheater, that is, when the company was still performing to a paying public, in January and July 1775 respectively, these works included highly emotional texts that alternated and occasionally overlapped spoken dialogue, declamation with pantomime and orchestral accompaniment. According to the Gothaische Gelehrte Zeitung, this style was attractive because, quote, those who have felt boredom from the simple recitative and aggravation through the aria's unavoidable incomprehensibility of the text will yet find therein a great advantage, that here the actor can deliver his entire power in declamation without consideration of the orchestra. This new genre comprised a model for how the German language could be set to music in a way that placated those like Gottsched, who believed that the ridiculousness and continuous singing of opera made the spectacle unintelligible and thus corrupted the theater's moral capacity. But Bende's melodramas were also practical. Melodrama, as cultivated in Gotha, required about 3 performers who did not have to be singers, and what's more, it was cheap to produce. Yet despite its success and practicality, melodrama remained a local phenomenon prior to the foundation of the court theater. The year 1775 was a significant turning point for the National Theater movement, not only because of the success of Bende's melodramas and the foundation of a permanent German theater in Gotha, but also because of the publication of Reichard's Theaterkalender, theater calendar. The editor conceived this periodical as one for a nation or empire. Addressed to the public, the introduction to the first edition explains, quote, in the present work I have sought such a collection that is equally useful to the artist as to the art enthusiast, and through its reports it helps in part to replace the lack of a general stage, since it may always remain an obstacle given Germany's political constitution. What set this periodical apart from other contemporary theater journals is that it reported on German and foreign language theater from across the empire and around the world rather than a few local centers. To accomplish this, Reichhardt relied upon a network of correspondence. The willingness of these contributors to submit reports makes the theater calendar's breadth of coverage simply remarkable, if somewhat inconsistent. Nevertheless, the contents of each roughly 300-page volume can be summarized as an introduction, a calendar with engravings from popular plays and operas, a series of speeches, reviews, and accounts of actors in well-known roles, reports addressing actors, theaters, and performances, critical and philosophical debates of theatrical subjects, histories of various national theaters and other foreign theaters outside of the empire, biographies of noteworthy actors, an index of active dramatists and theater composers, a catalog of printed works for the stage, an annotated bibliography of newly published critical texts, an index of foreign and imperial theater companies, and from 1775 until 1778, music examples from popular pieces. Indeed, this journal not only helped to inform Reichardt's programming decisions in Gotha, but it also delivered on his promise of providing a space in which the latest theatrical developments could be discussed in lieu of a central theater. Contributors submitted reports in such quantities that Reichhardt not only kept this journal going for nearly 25 years, but he was also able to publish the Theaterjournal für Deutschland. This subsequent periodical contained reports on the latest German theatrical activities from 1777 until 1783. To trace or list every topic discussed in even one of these journals is far beyond the scope of this paper. However, a few examples help to illustrate its relevance in contemporary society. On his journey throughout the empire in 1781, Christoph Friedrich Nicolai was equipped with an understanding of local theaters and measured them up against the information he found in Reichardt's journals. When the critic Karl Ludwig Furnau ruthlessly attacked Schwerin's court-affiliated theater in 1792, the director there, Karl Fischer, responded by telling Furnau to read the theater journal and theater calendar, for if he had, he, quote, would have stayed at home with his crumbled-together comments, end quote. The journal's announcement of the premieres of Bende's melodramas helped to spark interest in the new genre and inform those who wanted to compose similar works. Upon writing Sophonisba, the first melodrama written outside of Gotha following Medea, August Gottlieb Meissner turned to the theater calendar for information. He acknowledged the genre's irresistible power, but warned that it would be very wrong to conclude, quote, like the otherwise knowledgeable editor of the theater calendar, end quote, that melodramas would displace opera and Singspiel from German stages. In the years that followed, the periodicals helped initiate and perpetuate a melodramatic reform movement, one that sought to diminish the boredom and monotony such works caused through their unrelenting alternation of paratactic declamation monologues with music. Published in the 1778 volume of the theater calendar, Johann Friedrich Schenck's Über das musikalische Theater mit und ohne Gesang argued that this could be remedied by including simple songs and by drawing on a greater variety of subjects other than tragedies alone. Viewed as a whole, Reichardt's journals not only indicate which music theater topics were being discussed, but they also reveal the extent of the empire's theater network. While Thomas Baumann, Ian Woodfield, and others have investigated a few individual troupes, these periodicals betray the membership, repertories, and touring circuits of the remaining companies that have frequently been grouped together as wandering troupes. So just how many were there? Well, it is difficult to determine the precise number of court-affiliated touring national and Liebhabertheater, the Gotha-based periodicals connected between 1775 and 1775 and 1800. But judging from the number of theaters that sent in reports, it was well into the hundreds. Sorry about the labeling on this. Google Earth did not help me out, so sometimes it looks like Mannheim there. Sort of looks like it's Paris, but so my apologies. It's just not strong enough for what I need to do. So yeah, the theater calendar alone includes accounts from 43 foreign language theaters shown here. the 43 foreign language theaters shown here. These articles contain information on companies in Denmark, England, France, the Italian states, the Polish, Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Russian Empire, and Sweden, as well as a few less detailed accounts from Martinique, Guadeloupe, and Australia. Most of the reports, however, came from the Imperial National Theaters. The journal indicates that approximately 169 public, 30 court-affiliated, 17 court, 13 national, and 5 Liebhaber theaters operated throughout Europe during the last quarter of the 18th century. An average of 28 companies were active each year, again, most of which were public, and I think at its peak, it reported on, 41 currently active theaters. So excluding the 20 or so accounts from theaters touring large areas such as Westphalia and Alsace, troops brought Singspiel and Melodram to roughly 260 cities, towns, and villages. The majority of these German-language theaters were active within the Holy Roman Empire, but a goodly number of companies regularly performed as far away as Bucharest and St. Petersburg. Although not every theater possessed the resources necessary to offer Singspiel, most were at the very least able to stage drama that incorporated music to a lesser degree, such as melodrama. Gothe's central place in this network was further supported by personal correspondence and the mobility of its musicians. For example, the director of the Hamburg Theater, Friedrich Ludwig Schröder, often wrote to dramatist and Gotha court secretary, Friedrich Wilhelm Gotha, going as far as to regularly send a diary of his theater's day-to-day operations, which you can see here, an example of one of those pages. Schröder actively encouraged musicians, such as Bende, to perform as guests in Hamburg. When Bende resigned as Kapellmeister in the spring of 1778, he immediately embarked on a tour designed to capitalize on his newly earned fame. He first visited Hamburg and later traveled to Mannheim, Vienna, and Berlin, where he organized performances of his melodramas and Singspiele. While on tour, the composer crossed paths with musicians such as Mozart, Christian Neefe, Georg Vogler, and Carl Friedrich Zelte. Whereas Mozart reported to his father that he already carried around the scores to Bende's melodramas, Zelte later reminisced how, in 1779, he was so desperate to acquire a copy of Ariadne so that he could compose a similar style work, that he ended up composing a viola concerto in exchange for a pair of pigeons, which he then traded to the pigeon dealer who possessed the score that he found. Gotta do what you gotta do. So the Duke of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg ceased funding a Hoftheater in September of 1779. Now the theaters, actors, and musicians left Gotha to find employment in other centers, including Hamburg, Bonn, Frankfurt am Main, and Mainz. Most, however, took positions at the newly established Mannheim Nationaltheater. While there, those once active in Gotha, such as August Wilhelm Iffland, who would eventually go on to become the director of the Berlin National Theater, and Johann Michael Böck, remained in contact with their former colleagues. Böck regularly corresponded with Gotha, informing him of theatrical developments in Mannheim and the surrounding areas. While the librettist and when Gotha sought out a composer for his Singspiel Die Geisterinsel, he turned to the actor for assistance. While the librettist contemplating asking Mozart, Böck recalled how often, this is what you can see here, the musician told him that he did not want to set more German subjects because the Viennese only wanted Italian opera. Instead, he recommended Dittersdorf and suggested a set of terms that would ensure the work could be staged around the empire. Although Dittersdorf turned down the project, Johann Friedrich Anton Fleischmann, Friedrich Wilhelm Hack, Johann Friedrich Reichardt, and Johann Rudolf Zumsteig all eventually set Gotha's libretto. Just as personal correspondence like this continued shaping the creation of works behind the scenes, so too did Reichardt's journals more publicly inform dramatists and composers well after the dissolution of the Gotha Hoftheater. In conclusion, the national and national theater referred to regional government as well as culture, especially language. These aspects of nation were bound together in the Holy Roman Empire, at the center of which was the Duchy of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg. Although it was active for only 4 years, the Gotha theater made significant and enduring contributions to the empire's national theater movement, most notably the proliferation of melodrama and the publication of the theater calendar. While the former comprised a practical, popular, and accessible new form of music theater, the latter constituted a public forum in which the numerous Imperial National Theaters could share the latest local advances in music theater in a national space. This journal was in part responsible for bringing new pieces, including adaptations of pre-existing works, to ever-increasing areas. Indeed, the space in which German-language music theater developed in this period could be found as much in these journals as on local stages. Gothe's central position in the network of Imperial Nationaltheaters was further supported by personal contacts and the movement of its musicians, such as Georg Bender. But perhaps most importantly of all, Gotha-based periodicals, the mobility of its musicians, and the communication between its dramatists and musicians with those outside of the city reveal the extent to which German-language theaters extended and, more importantly, were connected throughout Central Europe. Gotha may hardly earn a mention today, but it was once at the heart of a music theatrical empire. Thank you.